Chapter 9, Jaguar. I'm on page 88. Doc and Flana got tickets to leave for Brasilia that afternoon. Doc also arranged to have Bill's remains flown back to his family in the States. Silver offered to drive them to the airport in his Land Rover, which was a lot nicer than our truck. Doc's final words to Buzz were, "By the time I get back, if I'm not convinced that Jake can fly that contraption of yours safely, then the deal's off." "Yes, sir," Buzz saluted and almost fell over because of the crutches. Doc shook his head in despair. We watched them drive away. Then Buzz turned to me. "We don't have much time to accomplish this mission." I followed him back to the warehouse. "I'm afraid I'm not going to be much help with this bum leg, Jake. Go ahead and take the tarp off and pull the Morpho outside." I managed to get it through the door without ripping a wing off. "Are you ready?" I looked at the Morpho, not sure if I would ever be ready, and hopeful that I wouldn't let Buzz down by flying it into the ground. "I guess so," I said. I ran back in and got the helmet. When I got back outside, I slipped it on my head. Buzz looked at me quizzically for a few moments. "I don't think you'll need that, unless you have a tendency to bump your head a lot." "I don't think I should fly without a helmet." "I don't think you should either, but you're not even close to flying yet. Bring the big toolbox out here." I ran back inside and lugged the toolbox back out. I figured he had a few adjustments to make before I took off. I was badly mistaken. "The first thing you're going to do is take this thing apart," Buzz said. "Every wire, nut, bolt, and cotter pin. Then you're going to put it all back together again. And I want it to look just like it does now." I thought he was joking. It would take hours to get it apart, and I wasn't sure if I could ever put it back together again. "I'm not a mechanic," I said, "and you won't be a mechanic when you finish either, but you'll understand how the Morpho works, and if something shakes loose in the wild blue, you'll know what it is and whether it's going to make you fall out of the sky. I'll tell you the names of the things as you take them apart. Then you'll tell me the names when you put them back together. We'll make a game out of it. And I hope for your sake that you're better with tools than your old man. Get ready to have your mind bent." Not only did my mind get bent, but my knuckles got bruised and my eyes blurred over with sweat from the stifling heat. It took me hours to get the ultralight apart, and Buzz was the reason. Every time I unhooked or unscrewed something, he'd ask me what it was and what it did. If I didn't know, I'd guess. If I was wrong, which I often was, he'd tell me the proper name and function. Periodically, he'd point at something with his crutch from the growing pile of nuts, bolts, and tubing, and ask me what it is. If I didn't answer correctly, he'd make me reassemble the connecting pieces until I could tell him exactly what it was and what it did. "Were you in the Army?" I asked. "Fat chance. They said I was too thin. Guess I wasn't a big enough target." "I think you missed your calling as a drill sergeant." I don't know how long it took, but when the sun went down, I thought Buzz would call it a day. But no, he had me run an extension cord to hook up a light so I could continue. Silver dropped by a couple of times and watched for a while. He said that he had a crew coming in the next day to rebuild the dock. As soon as it was finished, he planned to move his boat down from the Mirage. Finally, I put out the last cotter pin and unscrewed the last nut. My hands were swollen. I was hungry, and I couldn't remember being more exhausted. Buzz nodded, turned off the light, and hobbled back into the bunk room. All I wanted to do was get something to eat and climb into bed. But Buzz had other ideas. We began ultralight ground school. The first lecture was on weather flying. Buzz went on for over 2 hours. The bottom line was not to take off in the Morpho unless the weather was perfect and looked as if it would stay perfect throughout the flight. When he was finished with the lecture, I stumbled into the bathroom. When I got out, Buzz was in his bunk sound asleep, snoring away. I grabbed some food, collapsed on my own bunk, and almost dozed off in a mid-chew. A few hours later, I felt something hard poking me in the back. It was Buzz's crutch. He was a cruel man. Rise and shine, Ace. It took me all that day and a half that night to get the ultralight back together again. Every time I made a mistake, Buzz made me back up a few steps and start again. A couple of times I got so mad at him that I had to walk to the dock to calm down. That didn't seem to offend Buzz in the least. Silver and his hired help were making much better progress on the dock than I was on the ultralight. I envied them because they got to work in the water where it was relatively cool. When I finally got the Morpho back together, I held up the last cotter pin and ceremoniously snapped it through the end of the last bolt. Buzz looked at his watch. That didn't take you as long as I thought it would. I wasn't sure if he meant that as a compliment or not. So you understand how it works then? Yes, I said weakly. Do you think you could repeat the assembly? I think so, I said, praying he wouldn't ask me to do it again. I think you can too. Let's go in and get some sleep. The phone was ringing when we got outside. Buzz picked it up. It was Doc. I've never seen anything like it, Buzz said into the phone. Jake's a natural-born pilot. It's incredible. He winked at me and held his fingers to his lips. That's great. When do you think you'll be back? Silver finished the dock today. He'll bring his boat over tomorrow. He seems okay to me. I don't think you'll have any problems with him. Okay, bye. He hung up the phone. Flan and Doc met with Woolcolt today. He was very sorry to hear about Bill, and he thinks they should continue with the expedition. He's going to help them get the permit transferred. What were you saying about Silver? I asked. Doc wanted to know what I thought of him. He's just being cautious. What was all that stuff about my being a natural-born pilot? I haven't even flown the Morpho yet. Just wanted to bolster his spirits a bit. He was very pleased. The next morning I was up before the crutch poked me. Today was the day I'd be flying, or so I thought. I made a pot of coffee for Buzz, then went outside to look at the Morpho. I sure hope I had put it together right. About half an hour later, Buzz joined me outside. You have one more little chore before you climb into the cockpit. I frowned. You'll need to learn how to pack the Morpho's parachute. I didn't even know it had a parachute. Buzz hobbled back inside and pointed at one of the boxes. I opened it and pulled something out that looked like a backpack. He told me to haul it inside and put the chute out of the pack. There were actually 2 parachutes in the back, a primary chute and a smaller chute, and a smaller backup chute in case the first one malfunctioned. This is a ballistic parachute, he said. There's an explosive charge in the pack. When you pull the string, it shoots the parachute out away from the ultralight so it doesn't get tangled up in the wings. You mean you don't bail out? Nope. If you get in trouble, you pull the cord and you and the Morpho float to the ground like a dry autumn leaf. Ideally. You have never had to use a parachute? Have you ever had to use a parachute? One time, he said, and I got hung up in an oak tree and nearly broke my neck. This was not encouraging. The rainforest is nothing but trees, I pointed out. I know, he said. You probably won't need the chute, and if you do, you'll have to be very careful. Great. Buzz had me pack and repack the chute until I could have done it with blindfolds on. I think you have that down, he finally said. Now you can put the helmet on. I spent most of the day doing touch and goes. This exercise consisted of flying the Morpho down on the flat area in back of a warehouse, never getting more than about 10 feet off the ground. The idea is to get used to the throttle and other controls, he said. I want you to be able to land with your eyes closed. The ultralight's engine was very loud, despite the advanced muffler system Buzz had put on it. And at only 10 feet off the ground, the Morpho was very difficult to control. I felt that I was going to crash at any moment. But late afternoon, Buzz was satisfied that I could take the ultralight off and land it. Every muscle in my body ached. And I didn't know if this was from being jarred every time I landed or if the soreness was caused by tension. I think you've had enough for today, he said. Tomorrow, we'll put the pontoons on and see how you do with water landings. You know, Buzz, Doc's going to be back in a few days and expects me to know how to fly this thing. Buzz laughed. Believe it or not, you've already learned the hardest part, getting the ultralight up and getting it back down safely. The actual flying part is easy. Silver and his men finished the dock that evening, and he said that he would bring the Tito over next day. Early the following morning, Buzz had told me to attach the pontoons to the Morpho's landing gear. Landing and taking off from the water was much harder than landing and taking off from land. The water caused a lot more drag on the ultralight, and I had to get more speed before I could take off. When I landed, I had to watch out for the current and the crosswind so I wouldn't flip the Morpho over. I found that if one float started to come up off the water, I had to lean my weight towards it to get it to back down to the surface. After 20 touch and goes, I was drenched. I taxied over to the dock where Buzz was standing and shut the engine down. He looked up at the sky. I guess it's time to hit the wild blue yonder. But first, you've got to change into some dry clothes. At 2,000 feet, it can get darn cold when you're wet. 2,000 feet? He nodded. Thereabouts, he said. I want you to do some lazy circles. Just keep the warehouse in sight, and I'll keep in touch with this handheld radio. After I changed my clothes, I toppled the fuel tank off with gas, buckled myself into the seat, and flipped the visor down on my helmet. Okay, he said over the radio, let her rip. I took a deep breath and started the engine. When the oil pressure was right, I pulled the throttle all the way out. In seconds, I was airborne, but instead of reducing power and landing again, I pulled the control stick towards me and I was off. At first, I was very nervous, but this feeling was soon replaced with exhilaration. I was actually flying the Morpho, and it was awesome. What's your altitude? Buzz said. I looked at the altimeter. About 1,000 feet. Good. Bring her around counterclockwise. Keep the same pitch, then level out 2,000 feet. You're doing great. I could see for miles. Although the view was obscured somewhat by a thick haze of smoke from the wood burning, in the distance, miles from the river, I saw the leading edge of the rainforest. I took the ultralight up 2,000 feet and leveled it off. Buzz was a little speck standing near the dock. I was going 50 knots. At that speed, the controls were very responsive. To turn left, all it took was a little pressure on the stick and rudder pedal. I felt every puff of wind and the different temperatures as I flew through the thermals. Buzz had me fly 6 wide loops around the warehouse. Then he told me to come in for landing before I forgot how to get down. The landing was a little rough, but I got down safely and taxied over to the dock. Not bad, Buzz said. Not bad at all. It was wonderful. He smiled. Let's check this machine over, refuel, and then you can get back up there again. At the end of the day, after we put the ultralight into the warehouse, I was still flying, even though I was on the ground. Buzz was very pleased with how I had done.